Imagine a machine that roars to life, a machine that completely defies limits, and a legacy that races through time, all encapsulated in the ferocious Porsche 991. Welcome, fellow thrill seekers, to the world where curves and straightaways become your canvas, and the Porsche 991 is your paintbrush. Inside the cockpit, you're not just a driver, you are a warrior, a commander of torque and horsepower. Almost perfect? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover the Porsche 911 991, years 2011 to 2019. If you are a buyer or you already own a Porsche 911, this video is for you. Whoa! But first, enough with the window shopping. Hit the like and subscribe button. It signals the algorithm to push this video out to more Porsche enthusiasts. Let's go. Most Porsche 991s now are coming out of warranty, and so one of the biggest questions that most people possibly have to themselves is it reliable? Well, if we're looking at the engine and transmission, they have already proven to be rock solid. How rock solid? The 9A1 engine in the Porsche 991 is the same engine that is in the Porsche 997.2, and guess what? The 997.2s go for a huge premium, and the main reason that they go for a premium is because of that engine. Knowing a lot of Porsche shop owners here in Miami, universally, every single one of them praises the Porsche 991. It's the most trouble-free 911 that Porsche has ever made. I know a lot of 997.2s with over 200,000 miles, and they are daily driven and they are perfect. So if that's any indication of the mechanicals of these cars, they are a go. Except for a couple little things that are not really engine related, they're accessory related. For example, the water pump can give issues. Some people have had to replace them at 30,000 miles, some at 40,000 miles, and some never. But I wouldn't consider that engine related. Even though it's attached to the engine, those are accessories, and they're also maintenance items. You're gonna have to replace the water pump anyways eventually, and they're not that expensive. The only thing bad about the Porsche 991's engine is that you can't see it, but you can definitely hear it. The Porsche 991 is a very different car than any earlier Porsche 911. It's far more comfortable and far more daily drivable than earlier cars, to the point where on the highway, with the suspension softened up and the exhaust toned down, it's a cruiser. You can definitely do 500-600 miles per day on a Porsche 991, which is very similar to the Porsche 928, by the way. So I can see where the comparisons come from. But long distance comfort is where the similarities end. The Porsche 991 is as hardcore as it gets, and as a matter of fact, it's a lot sharper than virtually every single earlier 911 except for the GT cars. So it is most definitely not a Grand Tourer. So the dual nature of the Porsche 991 means that more people are looking at this Porsche 911 than virtually any other Porsche 911 in its history, and it's been very popular for Porsche. But it's not just that the car is more accessible. It's not that at all. There are huge advancements in the Porsche 991s that you do not see just by looking at it. The structure on the Porsche 991 is completely different than the 997s. This structure is bigger but also lighter and stiffer. An ultra rare thing in cars today where everything keeps getting more and more bloated. That didn't happen with the 991. It actually got lighter, stiffer, and yes, a little bit bigger, mainly in the track for better handling and stability. So the structures of these Porsche 991s are rock solid. And I can see the structure of these Porsche 991s outlasting the owners easily. And that's what you have in the Porsche 991, a Porsche that's gonna last several decades. Interiors. This is something that has been universally praised on the Porsche 991. The quality of the materials in the interior. Now, there is a big difference between perceived quality and actual quality, because plastic is plastic. But what is far more impressive in the Porsche 991 is the leather interiors, because usually leather interiors are a liability for the second or third or fourth owner. Leather interiors, specifically leather dashboards, look great for a couple years until inevitably the leather starts shrinking, it starts warping, and the interior starts looking like a mess. And this happens with most manufacturers that have full leather interiors. But this is not happening with the Porsche 991. Leather's leather, right? Wait till you see this. Usually, when you have leather bonded to plastic, one of two things happens. The leather shrinks, and the adhesive that is connecting it to the plastic is not strong enough to hold the actual leather, and so the leather pulls away. The other thing is that the actual adhesive itself, the glue, breaks down and loses all its strength. It's not just the heat. You see, when the plastics heat up, they gas out, and those gases, the new car smell, start breaking down the glue. And so every single manufacturer is bonding their leathers directly to that plastic. So what did Porsche do? They removed all the plastic on these 991 dashboards. It looks like this. There is just the EVA foam and the leather directly mounted to the top. This is how custom hot rods are built out in California, and it's usually not cheap. So with the Porsche 991 specifically, full leather interiors are totally worth it. So this new method of construction is the reason that the leather dashboards on the Porsche 991s are holding up a whole lot better than anything that came before it. Now, it's not all perfect. The door panels warp in the heat. Now, if you're coming from a classic Porsche and you see this, you're like, who cares? But if you've never done any kind of restoration, once you see the door panel separating, it can be a little bit alarming and it might make you think that there's something wrong with the car. This can easily be fixed with some glue, a heat gun, and a couple clamps. It's not a big deal. It's kind of like first world problems, considering what you're getting with the Porsche 991. Size versus the earlier Porsche 911s. Another reason why Porsche enthusiasts say that 991 is more of a tourer is because it's grown and is so much bigger than the earlier 911s. Hold on just a second. It's only a few inches bigger. It's still a very small car. For comparison, I think that we all can agree that the Porsche 993 is a tiny car, not that much bigger. And we also can agree that the Porsche 997 is also a very small car. You see, the reason the Porsche 991 looks bigger is mainly because of the higher belt line that also spans into the rear bumper, makes it look a lot bigger than what it really is. So the optical illusion of the raised belt line and the lower roof does make it look a lot bigger if it's by itself. But the moment that you park it next to any other car, you see the Porsche 991 is still the size of a real sports car. Ceramic versus steel brakes. When you search ceramic brakes online, you're gonna get two polar opposite opinions. Some people say it's worth it, and some people say the braking is worse in the cold, and some people have sold their cars because of the ceramic brakes. This is crazy. Most of the ceramic brakes that I've seen that drive not so good, as in the car really doesn't have brake feel when it's cold, is because it doesn't have the OEM pads. Usually, somewhere along the line, the pads were changed and the brakes don't feel quite right. If the pads are brand new, it should have better bite when it's cold and much better bite when it's hot. Now, there is this middle in the modulation that they can feel very different than the steel brakes. That's why the steel brakes are so popular. And so what a lot of people have done is change the brake pads to a different compound that is more drivable on the street. And that's exactly what I would do if I had the ceramics. These Pagid brake pads, they're far easier to drive on the streets, especially if you don't know what kind of brake pads are even on your car. Instead of giving up on them, try these brake pads. They should help a lot. And of course, bleed the brakes. A lot of people forget that. Now, the other thing that I've heard is that ceramic brakes can be a little bit noisy. And yes, that's true. It's just the harmonics of the brakes. There's nothing wrong with them. That's just the way that they are. They're basically racing brakes for the streets. So when the Porsche 991 came out, it was an NA motor, so naturally aspirated motor. With the 991.2, all 911s became turbocharged. Now you would think that that's a great thing because throughout the history, the Porsche 911 turbo has been the king of the hill. But believe it or not, there's actually mixed opinions about turbos being standard on all Porsche 911s. Well, it's very simple. The turbos act basically as a muffler, and it changes the sound of the Porsche 911's engine. But there are a lot of advantages to the 991.2, specifically power. On paper, it looks like you're getting only a little bump in power, but what you're really getting is a lot of torque. So the engine is a lot more usable in daily driving. The turbos spool up super fast and there's a very little turbo lag. And if you need more power, it's a lot less expensive to tune a turbo engine than a naturally aspirated engine, because you can easily up the boost with a simple tune and get an extra 100 horsepower. You don't even have that option on the naturally aspirated engine in the 991.1, and a version of the engine keeps on living in the new Porsche 992. CarPlay is still kind of laggy, to be honest with you, so I don't even count that. The real reason to get a 991.2 is the rear steering. That rear steering makes the 991 drive a lot smaller than the earlier models that don't have the rear steering. What it essentially does is make the car feel like it has a shorter wheelbase. That's what everybody has always loved about the Porsche 911, its short wheelbase. And not just because it's smaller, but because when you have a short wheelbase, everything feels more immediate. And so by Porsche doing this kind of wizardry and creating this rear wheel steering, the car feels a lot more immediate when you're turning on the highway, when you're hitting a bank or in a parking lot. That one thing has made the electronic steering on the newer generation 991s a pleasure to have. It'll never have the feel of a hydraulic steering, but it's so much more precise with the rear steering that it makes it almost worth it. Almost. I still prefer the hydraulic steering on the older Porsches. The best thing is that it is such an advanced car and it hides it all underneath its incredible bodywork. Nobody will suspect the amount of engineering that has gone into a Porsche 991 if they see it drive by. You only really start seeing the engineering when you drive it and after 30 years pass, that the car is still ticking. We've got one life to live and it's too short to drive boring cars. Find the nicest one you can find and enjoy.